Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
You are in the right place for conversations about current needs we as business leaders face regarding technology, customer expectations, and quickly changing markets. This program on the Voice of Bold Business Radio is about what it means to reach short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Program 173 is titled Leadership Reflection. What advice would you give to someone going into a leadership position for the first time? Today, we have two panelists answering that question. They are Debbi Sluys, a child care director of a multi-site organization and entrepreneur as a personal empowerment and development coach at Dare to Declare. Kyle Brown, founder of Resolve Ops, and a U.S. Army veteran, uses technology to solve problems and has been doing so for over 20 years. Welcome to the show, and we're going to jump right in. Kyle, what advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
Being objective focused versus being too focused on granular detail. If I knew someone who were seeking that advice, who were moving into a leadership role, that would be the first thing that I would say to them is, you're going to be responsible now for an objective being met versus your portion of it. I think the two are different mindsets. When you're a leader, you have to focus on getting to the objective and all of the things that you need to do to get there. Some may be technical, some may be people related and have nothing to do with the actual product or service or the technology. If we're talking technology, even if we're talking baking cakes, if you need to get 1,000 of them done by X date, how you bake them will be important, but you also need to be able to get your people to focus, because maybe you don't do 1,000 normally, maybe you only do 500. So becoming a more objective-oriented person that trying to focus on that would be probably the biggest piece of advice that I would give someone moving into a leadership role.
Thank you, Kyle. Debbi, what advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
Getting to know the people that you're actually working with and who'll be working for you and with you, and understanding what their vision is. What do they see the role is, what your role is, or what the vision is of the organization or the company. So I think that if you're not aware of what the organization's key core values are, that I think talking to someone above you, whether it be another leader, a mentor, someone that can mentor you, to understand what the core values are of the organization, and then develop collectively with the people that you're working with a vision. What's our vision for the future? And breaking it down into some manageable pieces, whether it be, small goals initially and looking at that bigger goal, but what do you want to accomplish? But doing that again collectively and really getting to know the people that you're going to be working with. And I would say that it's important to know the organization, but it's important to know about the individuals.
Let's start with this idea of objective, being objective both in where we are going and what we are doing for us and within our role, as well as objective in the fact that now all of a sudden it's more than me, right? It's more than me in my role. So when we're talking about objectiveness, how do we practice that as people? Because wherever we are along our leadership path, in the organization we're in, on our career path, we are going to continuously be working on our objectiveness. So I would love to hear from you about that. How do we practice objectiveness?
Everybody has their own, leadership style. For me, I'm always focused on whatever the primary goal is. Teamwork is not always easy. In fact, dealing with people is just a whole totally different. I'm an engineer by trade, and my passion's always been in software development. So I'm a very logical ABC 1, 2, 3 kind of guy. Machines don't tend to ask you a lot of questions. They just tend to do what you ask them to do most of the time. Dealing with human beings is a completely and totally different thing. Everyone has to have their eye on the prize. I liked Debbie's answer on getting to know the people you work with. I think that helps you figure out how you're going to meet the objective as a team, because you are the one that owns it as a leader. So the other folks on your team or your organization might not necessarily see things the way that you do, even after you talk to them. So I just think that line, that's kind of something you just have to establish early. You know, if we all know we have to get to this point, we have to get there. We don't really have any other alternatives. If you don't agree with how we're going about it, then, you know, offer some suggestions. But in the end, we have to all at least agree that we're all marching towards the same thing. So we really don't have a lot of room for folks that won't sort of march to the beat of that drum as a team. I think you have to identify who those folks are and either pull them aside and say, this is what we're trying to do. You're with us or you're not. And if not, then you have to find a replacement. I don't always think that's necessary. I think generally conversations, communications with people and getting clarity around things usually gets everyone on the same page.
What would you add to that, Debbie?
Well, I think to stay objective is to be open in terms of communication, like Kyle mentioned, but to be curious, to really listen with a spirit of curiosity, to say, you know, to the people that you're working with, help me understand, so that you're not going in with judgment and that you're really trying to understand their perspective. I think also as a leader to learn that it's not necessarily about me. And what I mean by that is that if someone's coming with a complaint or they're really unhappy about what appears to be their job, it may not actually be about the job. It may not actually even be about the way that you are as a leader, but it could be something, and most often it is something entirely different. That, you know, as a leader, again, then you can support that person in other ways. But I think that's been something for me to learn, and not to internalize those things, and then to stay objective in the way that I'm responding. I think also staying objective is to understand change, to understand the beast that it is, right? But that it also can be this thing of beauty, and to recognize that change is inevitable, to be objective and not to, again, to internalize those things or to take those things personally, but to support change and support people through change. And that just occurs through habits of excellence. So what I mean by that is creating habits of organization, like writing down lists, by, you know, not seeking perfection, but, you know, striving for excellence. So I think by having some of those boundaries and those flags, so to speak, that you can hang on to, people understand where you are, and it stays more objective.
Everything that has been shared so far is personal experience, and there's an element of what we value personally and how we bring what we value personally into adding value and living the values of the organization that we are a part of, right? We're joining somebody else's party when we go to work every day. And even when we're our own company, sometimes, and this is actually an interesting growth point that I've seen between companies that are around that 3-year to 5-year mark, when they start getting over 10 employees, it becomes very clear when the values are the founder's values or the CEO's values versus something separate that even the founder and the CEO step into. We all agree here. The word agreement has come up from both of you before in your answers and what you've shared. And so these agreements that we have has to be bigger than us individually, regardless of our role. If we're coming into an organization the first time, if we have our first management role, if we've been promoted up to senior management, if we've started our own organization, whatever that is, having a separateness and a boundary there is really important. We know what we value, and maybe this is going to be the answer to the question. We have to know what we value to be able to understand what other people value, to be able to understand how that aligns with the vision and the mission of the organization that we're a part of. But I'm curious for you, an example or a story or a process that you've used or know that exists that is helpful to you on occasion. How do you take what you value when it seems in conflict or maybe disharmony, right? There's a disharmony between what we value and what we're perceiving the goal to be within our organization and how we're getting there. How do you reconcile that?
I always come back to objective, because objectives are provided that they're very clear. they always give you a light, if you will, to march toward. That you have in common with everybody if you don't have anything else in common, whether it's set by the founder or whether it's set by, in a smaller company, maybe it's set by the founder, maybe in a larger company it's set by the organization lead, whoever that might be. But that's clear to everybody. There generally is always a way to get to where you're trying to go without having to necessarily compromise your own values. Let me approach it this way. I've had a personal experience where I was working with someone, and I was a manager. There were 7 people on the team, and one of the people did have a personal issue with the way that everyone else had agreed to do something. This person's from another culture, a different part of the world. To everyone else, it didn't really make any sense. But to this person, it was extremely important. So we essentially swapped roles, had that person swap their responsibilities with someone else. Ultimately, they were happy with what what their new assignment was. It was still toward the same objective, but it was a different assignment. And someone else who did not have those feelings or was not uncomfortable or didn't feel like they were compromising anything did the other set of tasks. I could have easily said to the person, no, this is your job. You just have to do it. But instead of doing that, I kept the person. I listened to the person. To Debbie's earlier point, I talked to the person. I listened to the person. I listened to their perspective since they were the one that had the challenge and felt certain way about it. And, we got over it. Had I just not done that, I may have lost a team member that could have set the whole project back. So I think that was the best way for me to answer that was with that particular real life situation.
It's a great example. Getting the right people in the right place to support what they believe in. And because when we believe in what we're doing, we'll get it done better. We'll get it done faster. We'll get it done. To your point, Kyle, something that you said that really resonated with me. Sometimes all we have in common is the objective.
Right.
Yeah.
We all agree on that.
Yeah, exactly. What would you add, Debbie?
I'm a director at a childcare organization, and I have about 70 predominantly women. There's a few men as well in the field. And a few years ago, we went through a really large change in that the government of Ontario here in Canada, they made a huge overhaul in terms of regulations. So that was really difficult to try to sift through to say, okay, like you said, where are our objectives, right? So we know that we all want quality care for children. That is fundamental. That's the foundation. But we were so confused by the government's expectations and how much they were downloading so quickly that we just felt like we were getting lost in it. So as a leader, I had to slow that process down and highlight for the staff who would sometimes get discouraged because so much paperwork was coming their way that they couldn't see the objective anymore to say, is this quality care for children when we have to fill out all these, all this paperwork? So just about coming back, but also to continue to advocate, to let the government know that this is what's happening. And they actually subsequently have made some changes into some of their expectations. So there's an advocacy role as well. And just to continue to sort of push the boundaries to what the government was saying to us to say, okay, is this really what's best for children? It's about knowing your core values, seeing the other person's side, in this case, understanding where the government was coming from and trying to say, how can we fit this together? And like Kyle said about the objective, knowing that we're all on the same page and that we want what's best for children.
This conversation includes you, listeners out there. Make sure you're using hashtag VBB Radio on the social media and online programs and platforms that you are using to add your voice to the conversation. Share your stories, ask your questions. It's what we're doing here on this show live. Your participation matters too. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to The Voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
one of the key things that I have taken away, having done so many shows for the Voice of Bold Business Radio, is that our behavior matters. And you heard it in the first half of this program because, our conditioning of our family of origin, our conditioning of the work experience and life experience that we have reflect how we do what we do and the reasons behind we do what we do, whether they're conscious or not. And whether we have formal training or we're learning as we go, and some of us are doing both, right? We've had formal training and we've switched gears, and either way, we're learning as we go. When we consider that and we shine a light and are willing to look back at those things, we can learn a lot about ourselves. And I'm talking about personal awareness, because as a leader, our personal awareness is necessary to be able to know what somebody else needs. We can never know what anybody else needs until we know what we need. And that could be as simple as knowing what we value in a moment. Knowing that when we respond to something, when something is on fire, we're going to have a default first response. And the awareness piece is to then go, okay, I know my behavior in this default initial response when whatever happens sends me into autopilot or reaction mode. And the awareness piece comes in because then we can choose to see, I want a different initial reaction. I would like to respond instead. And actually practicing the behavior every day of how the response is, how the behavior looks and sounds and feels like, so that in the point where we are thrown into the middle of something crazy, unknown, and unexpected, we can fall back on what we have been practicing, recognizing that that's our choice to make a better, more effective decision and choose a set of behaviors to allow us to go forward. So that's just one of the things that I have taken away from all of the previous shows on the Voice of Bold Business Radio that we could sum up in just a couple of minutes to send home with you today to think about and look at how you are doing it in your own personal leadership development. You are listening to program 173, Leadership Reflection, and I'm talking with Debbi Sluys and Kyle Brown. We've been talking about stepping into a leadership role for the first time, and we went deep fast. We're talking about values. We're talking about objectives. We're talking about objectiveness, and how all of those pieces, as they're moving and working together, really make a difference to the success of a team, to the success of us. And we're going to take it one step further right now, and we're going to start with this particular piece. As leaders, those of you who have been in the roles before, those of you just now here, this is really important. We're dealing with ambiguity every day. We don't know what's coming our way. We don't know how things are going to shake out. We don't know what's going to change in the marketplace with our customers, with regulations, with technology. And so when we wake up one morning and change is all around us, this is the type of stuff that when we know ourselves and we know the objectives and we have a pretty clear goal, and we're I say pretty clear, I mean crystal clear in our communication, it's easy to fall back on and regroup to move forward. And so that's where this question is coming from. And I hope I bought you just enough time to think about it.
Often in frequent communication, not just because of the constant changes, but especially in today's world. Things are changing very, very fast. Goals change, objectives change. Whether the company is going to be in business tomorrow, whether the organization is going to exist tomorrow, all of those things seem to be happening faster, at least when I talk to folks that have been in business longer than I have, or who've been when I was in the corporate world, folks who had been around a lot longer than me. Things are just a lot faster now than they used to be. So I think frequent communication is a key. I think you have to it's one thing to just reiterate the goals on a regular basis, even if they aren't changing. People still forget. People's lives don't necessarily revolve around whatever the goal or objective is. Vice president of operations is in a large company. Whoever's dictating or providing the vision and the objectives, Once those are provided, other people have to be reminded of them. So it's good to just communicate on a regular basis, weekly. There's a style of management now where folks meet every single day in the morning and then once again in the afternoon, and they just talk about, at least in the technology space, we do this a lot. And we only talk about the objective, what obstacles might be in your way that are preventing you from getting there, and how anybody else on the team can help you. And doing that every day, it not only does it provide a reminder to you of what you're trying to accomplish or what you're all working toward, it also helps everyone get a status on who's where with what. I think because of that, it's hard to forget it because you're talking about it every single day versus it's on a website somewhere and you haven't talked about it since you got hired. I think it's really easy to lose what your purpose is in that last scenario. Meeting regularly, I think, it will keep you sharp, keep your team sharp, keep them on their toes, and keep them at least knowledgeable and aware of what they are working toward.
Debbi, what would you add?
I would agree with that. And I can give some concrete examples where we do weekly summaries. So I have managers who also then are leadership positions. And so that way they have more the detailed kind of things like, the dishwasher broke at the childcare this week, but it's been repaired. So nobody has to do hand washing anymore, though, like washing the dishes by hand. But we also do the larger meetings so that people are feeling more connected with the full organization. So I think what Kyle was saying, communication on a regular basis, but I'd also say it's beneficial when it's done in varied forms. So I think by using visuals, by using metaphors, that's a great way to communicate the vision, and by doing it. And we also do it through social media. So by using a Facebook page, communicating that way. But it's great when it's not just a singular voice. So it's not just the leader's voice, but that the colleagues are encouraging each other. And that so that if there is a new idea that someone brings forward, to say, hey, would you like to lead that? Because I think it's really powerful when colleagues can hear, an up and coming leader or someone else that they're used to working with on a regular basis, leading something. And I think that the voice has to be authentic. And when it's authentic, when it's truthful, then people are going to follow what that vision is all about.
All right. This next question is just for Kyle. And it's going to follow with a question just for you, Debbi. All right, Kyle, your background, you're a veteran. So you have been trained differently than people who have gone to school or are figuring it out on their own, right? And so I want to know, and I know our listeners want to know, the disconnect between how to achieve our objectives, our stated goals. How does it differ between the private sector and the military? And maybe what is your biggest key takeaway now being in the private sector for everybody listening?
I went into the military very early in my life. I was still a teenager. So my mindset was a lot different than it is today. I'm no longer a teenager. And it was probably a good thing that I had that experience at that time in my life, because I got introduced to some leadership styles that I really haven't ever seen again since I left the military. And for good reason. There are good reasons for it. I think the military is a place where you're being trained for the type of work that could potentially be, deadly. So the training does need to be a little more intense. But one of my biggest takeaways from the military was in the way that world operates. And I talk to my wife about this all the time. So it's funny you asked me that question. One of the biggest differences from the military and the civilian world, and I've been in the civilian world, we call it civilian world, a lot longer than I was in the military, but still, I still see these differences every day. And it's and I'm going to try to say this, I'm not, I like to be direct as possible with people, but I also respect people's feelings. The military just does not tolerate excuses. It's not a place for excuses. If you don't, and you can probably hear that in some of my other answers, right? If you don't step up to meet what you're being asked to do, then you probably won't stay there very long. In the civilian world, I find that there are a tremendous number of excuses made as to why things aren't getting done. And I just feel like, we're all human at the end of the day. And, everybody's not going to be a soldier. Just like some soldiers I know for a fact, wouldn't do very well in the civilian world. It goes both ways. But I think that the biggest difference is that there's a very no nonsense approach to getting things done in the military. And there aren't no excuses acceptable. Race isn't acceptable. Age isn't acceptable. Bad weather isn't. Nothing's acceptable. There's no acceptable reason for not doing anything or meeting an objective. Whereas in the civilian world, things are a lot more lax. And unfortunately, sometimes people can take advantage of that. And, you can miss deadlines and not meet objectives. And it just makes it harder on everybody else. But it is a challenge to kind of realize that you're not a soldier. This isn't the military. This is the civilian world. And I didn't have a big problem with it because I was not in the military very, very long. But I've seen other people kind of struggle with that. So I think that's one of the biggest differences. Just, no excuses accepted in one world, and there's several excuses tend to be made in the other world. That's been my experience.
All right, Debbi, I'm curious what your biggest leadership lesson has been working in a multi-site environment that allows you to have employees directly on site with you as well as remote employees.
I think my biggest lesson probably was my biggest failure. Right. So, yes. So it was probably about 12 years ago, and we doubled in size. So I went from a staff of maybe 30 to 60, 70. And I became militant. So it's funny about military. I really was like, setting down rules, and because I was fearful that things were going to be beyond my control. Control measures were in terms of the quality that we were providing. I just really became very militant. And then I had a real big revolt on my hands, and rightfully so, because what I needed to do was I needed to slow the process down. Now I wasn't really afforded that. It was really, this change occurred because we had a lot of funding that came all at once, and the government, as I said, was really trying to grow these programs quickly. But that was a big lesson for me, was to look at each new person that came on my team as an individual, get to know them, understand what they're bringing to the team in terms of their strengths. How do they want to be valued? How do they want to be appreciated? It's not like one blanket where you say, everybody stands up and gets clapped for at a staff meeting. No. Some people hate that, right? They just would like to pat the back, in private, or to say good job. So all those kinds of things, I had to really learn to slow things down, get to know people fairly quickly. That was probably one of my biggest lessons. And also, as I've matured in my role, I've been now in this role for almost close to 30 years. Some of them I'm old enough to be their mother, and they say that, and I embrace that. I think that as a mom, you tell your children the way that it's going to be, but you do it in love. And that's how I do it with my educators and with the staff that I work with, is that I let them know, but it's for their own good, so to speak. And that sounds very maternal and motherly, but it works for me. And I feel that I have a loyalty from the educators because they know that I'm speaking truth to them. And I'm doing it for their best, but also for the best of our organization and for the children and families that we serve.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
There is such a variety of ways that we communicate. I mean, you've heard it as Debbi and as Kyle are sharing their stories and experiences, how they go about communicating, what they put into communication to be as clear as possible, the way that they look at responses to what's being communicated, and modify and adjust to make what's being said, to make the objectives, the goals that we're working toward as teams crystal clear. And in that communication, one of the things that we must look at is what we fall back on. Going back to this reflection piece, the reflection of what worked last time and what didn't. Are we getting the results we want on this path right now the way we want? Because we can shift in minute amounts between reflection points of a project. Hey, things are already behind and we're only on step 2.3 or whatever it might be. So what do we think about? How do we look at this? And what must change to get us back on track, back on time with the resources we have, or with the insertion of additional resources to keep us getting closer to our end goal? That is an agreement that everybody has made. We're on the team. We're going to get to this goal. And so everybody has part responsibility. And when we can show up, we can own our actions, we can be accountable for what's going on and model corrections, alignment, adjustments along the way to keep things going, means other people are going to learn that as well. Here's the cadence that we work with. Here's how we work together. And this is what communication looks like in the environment we're in, so that we can create a shared meaning. And together we know where we're going. It's time for our last question, which happens to be my favorite. What makes it bold to reflect on our own leadership?
You have to be able to look in the mirror yourself and look for your own shortcomings. If you're going to be leading somebody else, you need to be able to call yourself out when you're wrong. You need to be able to accept that someone else may have the answer, even if they aren't the leader. That's a part of what makes it bold. And not everyone can do that. Some people have to have all the answers, or they feel like they somehow aren't leading. I don't agree with that. I think I'm happy if my team or my organization is coming to me with suggestions and ideas. And almost always, if you put questions to a group of people that all understand what you're working toward, almost always you're going to get somebody that says something or makes a recommendation that you never even thought about. And it may be the best way to actually go about doing it. So, but I think, if the leader isn't willing to do that, isn't willing to be bold enough to do that, and to admit that they don't have all the answers, and to accept feedback from other people around them, I think that's one of the things that makes it bold. If you don't have that, you're not getting the true benefit of a team.
All right, Debbie, what would you say?
I think what makes it bold is the fact that it's not always embraced, and it's certainly not always celebrated. I think that a certain work ethic is that working by being self-reflective? And yet I would say that a leader will burn out if they don't do self-care and self-reflection and become self-aware. They need to understand, why do I react? Why is my body temperature rising at this discussion? Or why am I not paying attention to that? So I think by being self-aware is bold. It's not necessarily, as I said, embraced, I think, in our culture as seen as working hard, but it's so important to discover what's your inner genius and focus on that and bring that inner genius out and take time to reflect on that, and maybe delegate some of the other more menial tasks to others, so that you can harness that energy and the focus of your vision. So I think what it does is it's bold enough to stand apart from managers and to really be a leader, because a leader is self-reflective. That to me is the definition of a leader. And as Kyle said, I think that's how you get your best ideas. I would say that the times that I probably am the most self-reflective is when I'm in the getting ready in the morning, showering, and so forth, I have brilliant ideas. And I literally take a pad of paper, you too, eh? I take a pad of paper and I put it in my bathroom, on my bathroom counter, and I step out quickly and write them down, because otherwise they're going to be lost in 37 seconds. So anyways, I absolutely would say that a leader needs to be self-reflective, or they may not be leading for very much longer. Yeah.
You will find the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P173. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 173. You may also search the site for leadership reflection. As you are listening, you may have had your own stories pop up. You may have had questions pop up. You may have experiences that others can benefit from hearing. Keep the conversation going. Tell us what you think. Give us a comment, a rating, a review on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, whatever social media platform, whatever listening platform you are tuning in from. Because you and I can learn from each other's experiences without having that life experience. We can take what you've learned, we can take what I've learned, and we can apply those takeaways, those lessons for our own practical application. It's up to you. How will you increase your awareness by engaging in your own leadership reflection?
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.